The scratching started on a Tuesday night, around 3 in the morning. Not the casual scratch of a cat wanting attention, but desperate, frantic clawing, like something was trying to break through the wood itself to get away from whatever hell waited on the other side. Bukowski lay in bed, cigarette burning between his fingers, staring at the water-stained ceiling of his East Hollywood apartment. The sound wouldn't stop. Scratch, 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 persistent as a bad memory. He'd been drinking since 6, cheap wine that tasted like regret and copper pennies, and the scratching felt like it was happening inside his skull. But it wasn't. It was coming from the hallway, right outside his door. "Fuck off," he muttered to the darkness. The scratching continued. He sat up, the springs of his mattress groaning like an old man's knees. The bottle on the floor was empty. Of course it was. He reached for another cigarette from the pack on the nightstand, lit it, and shuffled toward the door in his stained undershirt and boxer shorts. If you're listening to this, and it makes sense to you, if you've ever been woken up at 3 in the morning by something that wouldn't let you ignore it, hit that subscribe button. We're going to need each other for what comes next. Through the peephole, he could see nothing but the dim yellow light of the hallway bulb that had been flickering for 2 months. The building manager didn't give a shit. Nobody gave a shit about anything in this place. That's why people like Bukowski lived here. He opened the door. A gray tabby cat sat there, thin as a coat hanger, looking up at him with eyes that had seen too much. The animal's fur was matted, and it had that desperate look of something that had been calling for help long past the point of expecting an answer. "The hell do you want?" The cat meowed. Not a cute meow, but a ragged, hoarse sound that came from somewhere deep and broken. Bukowski looked down the hallway. 3 doors down, apartment 7B. That's where the sound had been coming from before it migrated to his door. Old guy lived there. Bukowski had seen him a few times, shuffling to get his mail, always wearing the same brown cardigan with holes in the elbows. They'd never spoken. You didn't speak to people in buildings like this. That was the arrangement. The cat scratched at his leg, tentatively, like it was testing whether he was real or just another hallucination in a long series of disappointments. "You belong to the old man?" The cat meowed again, that same broken sound. Something in Bukowski's gut, some instinct that survived beneath all the alcohol and cynicism, told him what he already knew. The old man was dead. Had to be. And this cat had been in there with the body, probably for days, and somehow got out or was let out by someone who didn't want the responsibility of dealing with it. He looked at the cat. The cat looked at him. Shit. He walked down to apartment 7B, the cat following close behind, weaving between his legs like it was afraid he might disappear. The door was closed, but not locked, just pulled shut. Bukowski pushed it open. The smell hit him first. Not overwhelming yet, but getting there. Sweet and rotten, like fruit left in the sun too long, mixed with something else. Something that made your throat close up. The apartment was dark except for the blue glow of a television playing to no one. Some infomercial about kitchen knives that could cut through anything. The volume was low, just a murmur of enthusiastic salesmanship delivered to a corpse. The old man was in his recliner, still wearing that brown cardigan. His head was tilted back, mouth open, eyes half closed, like he'd fallen asleep watching TV and just never woke up. 3 days, maybe 4. The mail piled up on the floor by the door confirmed it. 3 days of flyers and bills that nobody would ever read. Bukowski stood there for a moment, cigarette smoke curling up toward the ceiling. The cat had come in with him and was now sitting beside the recliner, looking up at the body with that same exhausted expression. "Yeah," Bukowski said to the cat. "He's gone." He should call someone, building manager, police, someone whose job it was to deal with dead bodies in cheap apartments. But he didn't move. He just stood there, smoking, looking at this man who had died alone watching television while trying to sell himself kitchen knives he'd never buy. This could be him in 20 years. Hell, could be him next week. Same chair, different apartment. Same silence. Same nobody giving a shit. The cat meowed. "I know," Bukowski said. He backed out of the apartment, pulling the door closed behind him. The cat followed. Back in the hallway, under that flickering yellow light, Bukowski looked down at the animal. "I'm not a cat person." The cat sat down and started licking its paw, like it had heard that before and didn't believe it. "I'm serious. I can barely take care of myself. You understand that?" The cat stopped licking and looked up at him with those tired eyes. Eyes that had spent days in an apartment with death, waiting for someone to notice, someone to care. Bukowski sighed. "Fuck it. Come on." Back in his apartment, he poured milk into a chipped bowl and set it on the floor. The cat approached cautiously, sniffed it, then started drinking like it hadn't had water in days, which it probably hadn't. He sat at his kitchen table, really just a small wooden thing he'd found on the street and dragged up 4 flights of stairs, and watched the animal drink. Outside, Los Angeles continued not caring. Cars passed, sirens wailed in the distance. Someone in the building above was fucking or fighting, hard to tell which. The city had its own rhythm, and death was just another beat in the song. The cat finished drinking and looked up at him. "Don't expect much," Bukowski said. "I got no schedule. I drink too much. I sleep during the day. I write at night. I'm gone sometimes for days. This ain't gonna be some heartwarming story about a man and his cat learning to love again." The cat walked over and rubbed against his leg. "Stop that." It kept doing it. Bukowski reached down and touched the animal's head. The fur was dirty, matted in places. The cat was thin, ribs visible under the skin. It had been living on borrowed time in that apartment, surviving on whatever it could find, probably drinking from the toilet. Tell me in the comments where you're listening to this from. And give me a number, 0 to 10, on how this story's hitting you so far. I want to know if this makes sense to anyone else, or if it's just me out here talking to the void. He picked the cat up. It didn't resist, just went limp in his arms, like it had given up on everything and was willing to accept whatever came next. Bukowski carried it to the bathroom, ran warm water in the sink, and started washing the animal. The cat tolerated it. Didn't fight, didn't scratch. Just sat there in the water while Bukowski worked the dirt out of its fur with dish soap, the only soap he had. The water turned gray, then brown. The animal was so small underneath all that matted fur. Fragile. Temporary. Everything was temporary. He dried the cat with a towel that had seen better days, then set it on the bathroom floor. It shook itself, looked up at him, and meowed. Softer this time, not broken. "You need a name, I guess." The cat blinked slowly. He thought about the old man in apartment 7B, dead in his recliner, surrounded by all the things he'd accumulated that didn't mean shit now that he was gone. The television still playing, the mail piling up, the cat scratching at doors, trying to find someone who'd notice. "I'll call you Nobody," Bukowski said, "because that's who came when he died. Nobody." The cat meowed like it understood, like it had always been called that, and was just waiting for someone to say it out loud. Bukowski went back to his typewriter. An old Royal that had seen him through a decade of rejection letters and small checks from magazines nobody read. He rolled in a fresh sheet of paper and sat there, cigarette between his lips, fingers on the keys. Nobody jumped up onto the desk and sat down next to the typewriter, watching him with those tired eyes. "Don't distract me." The cat didn't move. He started typing. Words about death and loneliness and cities that ate people alive and spit out their bones. Words about 3 in the morning and scratching sounds and old men dying alone. Words about cats that survived, because that's what living things do. They survive until they don't. Nobody watched him type for an hour, then curled up on the corner of the desk and fell asleep. Bukowski kept writing. The next morning, really afternoon since morning didn't exist in his world, he called the building manager about the dead guy in 7B. The manager, a fat man named Morris, who smelled like cigars and failure, sounded annoyed. "You sure he's dead?" "Pretty fucking sure." "You check for a pulse?" "I check for rot, he's got it." Morris sighed. "I'll call it in. You didn't touch anything, did you?" "Just his cat." "He had a cat?" "Not anymore." Morris hung up. By evening, the police had come and gone. An ambulance had taken the body away. The apartment was sealed with yellow tape that would stay up for a few days until someone remembered to come back and clean the place out. Nobody would claim the old man's things. Nobody would come to whatever service they had for him, if they even had one. He'd just disappear, like he'd never been there at all. Except for the cat. Nobody was sitting on Bukowski's windowsill, looking out at the street below where people moved through their lives, oblivious to the fact that 3 floors up, a man had died alone and nobody knew for 3 days. "You hungry?" The cat looked back at him. Bukowski opened a can of tuna, the cheap kind he bought for himself, not cat food, and dumped it in the bowl. Nobody jumped down from the windowsill and ate like it was the first real food it had seen in weeks. Which it probably was. He watched the cat eat and felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Not love. He wasn't that far gone yet. But something adjacent to it. Recognition, maybe. The acknowledgement that here was another living thing that had been disappointed by existence, but kept going anyway. The cat finished eating and started cleaning itself, that ritualistic licking that cats do to pretend they have dignity. "You know what your problem is?" Bukowski said to the cat. "Same as mine. You keep expecting things to get better and they don't. But you keep waiting anyway." Nobody looked at him with those gray-green eyes, the same color as the sky before a storm that never quite arrives. "We're stuck with each other now," Bukowski continued. "You get that, right? This ain't temporary. I ain't taking you to some shelter where they'll put you in a cage and gas you after a week. You're here. I'm here. We're both here because everywhere else is worse." The cat blinked slowly. That cat way of saying they understand, or at least that they're listening. Bukowski poured himself a glass of wine. The bottle was new, wouldn't be new for long. He sat at his typewriter, nobody curled up in the same spot on his desk, and he started typing again. He wrote about the old man in 7B. Not the death itself, but the life that led to it. The accumulation of days that amounted to nothing. The slow fade from visible to invisible. From participant to observer to absence. He wrote about how easy it was to disappear, even while you were still alive. The words came easier with the cat there. Not because the cat was inspiring or magical or any of that bullshit, but because the cat was real. It was warm and breathing, and it existed in the same fucked up world he did, and that was enough. Days turned into weeks. Nobody settled into a routine that mirrored Bukowski's own. Sleep during the day, active at night, suspicious of everyone, comfortable with silence. They were roommates in the truest sense, sharing space but not demanding anything from each other. Bukowski would write, and nobody would watch. Sometimes the cat would walk across the typewriter keys, leaving nonsense in the middle of a sentence, and Bukowski would curse and light another cigarette and keep going. He bought cat food, the cheap kind, nothing fancy. Nobody ate it without complaint. He scooped a litter box he'd bought at the corner store. A task he'd never imagined himself doing, but did anyway, because the alternative was cat shit on the floor. The cat never scratched the furniture, never knocked things over, never made demands. It just existed alongside him. Another creature trying to make sense of a world that didn't make sense. Sometimes, late at night when the wine had done its work and the words had stopped coming, Bukowski would pick up Nobody and hold the cat in his lap while he stared out the window at the Los Angeles night. The cat would purr, a rusty, uneven sound, like an engine that hadn't been started in years. "You know what I think?" Bukowski would say to the cat. "I think the old man had the right idea. Die in your chair, watching TV, nobody around to make a fuss. That's the way to go. Quick, quiet, nobody crying about it because nobody knows." Nobody would purr louder, like it disagreed. "But then, you were there," Bukowski continued. "You noticed. You tried to get help. That's got to count for something." The cat would stretch, claws extending and retracting, then settle back into his lap. One night, about 2 months after Nobody had scratched on his door, Bukowski was at the typewriter when he caught his reflection in the dark window. He looked tired, more tired than usual. His face had more lines than he remembered. His eyes had that same worn-out look he'd seen on every drunk and broken person he'd ever known. Then Nobody jumped onto the desk and sat down, and Bukowski saw the cat's reflection next to his own. Same tired eyes, same expression of having seen too much and expecting nothing to change. "We look like shit," he said to the cat. Nobody meowed in agreement. But there was something else in that reflection, something he hadn't noticed before. They were both still there, still breathing, still moving through the hours like they mattered, even when they probably didn't. The old man in 7B was gone, reduced to ash, or buried in some plot nobody would visit. His apartment had been cleaned out, his possessions thrown away or donated or stolen. Within a month, someone else had moved in. A young couple with dreams of making it in Los Angeles, oblivious to the fact that someone had died in that recliner they were probably sitting in right now. But the cat had survived. And somehow, against all logic and expectation, so had Bukowski. He reached over and scratched Nobody behind the ears. The cat leaned into it, purring that broken engine purr. "You're all right," Bukowski said. "For a cat." Nobody closed its eyes and kept purring. Outside, the city continued its indifferent symphony. Sirens, car horns, distant arguments, the hum of traffic on the Hollywood freeway. Los Angeles at night, eating people alive and spitting out their bones, just like it always had. But in this apartment, on the 4th floor of a building that should have been condemned years ago, a man and a cat sat together in the silence. Not happy exactly. Not saved or redeemed or any of that sentimental garbage. Just existing in the same space. Two creatures who'd been let down by life too many times to expect anything different. Finding something like comfort in the shared understanding that they were both still here. Still going. Still refusing to disappear quietly. Bukowski typed another line. Nobody watched. The wine bottle got emptier. The cigarette smoke curled toward the ceiling. The hours passed. And in the morning, really afternoon, when Bukowski finally crawled into bed, Nobody would curl up at his feet, a warm weight that reminded him he wasn't completely alone. Not love, not salvation, not any of those big words people use to make meaning out of meaninglessness. Just a cat. Just a man. Just another day survived. And sometimes, that was enough. The seasons change the way they do in Los Angeles. barely noticeable unless you paid attention to the angle of the light or the temperature dropping from unbearable to merely uncomfortable. Bukowski paid attention to these things because that's what writers do when they're not writing. They notice the small shifts, the minor degradations, the way everything slowly falls apart and calls it progress. Nobody grew fatter. Not much, but enough that you couldn't see the ribs anymore. The cat's fur had a shine to it now, and those tired eyes looked less desperate, more resigned, which was progress in its own way. They developed rituals, Bukowski and the cat. Every evening around 6, when the sun was starting its descent into the Pacific and the Hollywood sign glowed pink in the distance, Bukowski would open a can of cat food and a bottle of wine. He'd pour the food into Nobody's bowl and the wine into his glass, and they'd eat dinner together. Him at the table, the cat on the floor beside it. Sometimes he'd read to the cat. Not poetry or anything pretentious. Just the newspaper, the sports section mostly, reading the race results from Santa Anita. Cat's cradle won in the 5th, paid 11-1. I should have bet him. Always bet the horses with ridiculous names. They know they've got something to prove. Nobody would look up from the food bowl like it was considering this wisdom, then go back to eating. The building changed around them. The young couple in 7B fought for 3 months, then one of them moved out, then the other one. Then a single mother with 2 kids moved in, and Bukowski could hear them through the walls, the kids running, the mother exhausted, trying to make it work in a place where nothing worked. He saw her in the hallway once, struggling with groceries and children, and she looked at him like she was waiting for him to say something helpful or judgmental. He just nodded and kept walking. What was there to say? She knew what kind of building this was. They all did. You ended up here when everywhere else had said no. But one day he left a bag of groceries by her door. Nothing extravagant, some cans of soup, bread, peanut butter, the kind of stuff that kept. He didn't knock, just left it there and went back to his apartment. The next day she knocked on his door. I wanted to say thank you, she said when he opened it. She was young, maybe late 20s, but her eyes were older. For the food. Wasn't me. The manager said, "Manager's wrong a lot." She smiled, tired, but real. Well, whoever it was, thank you. Nobody appeared behind Bukowski, winding between his legs to look out at the visitor. "You have a cat?" she said. "He has me. There's a difference." "What's his name?" "Nobody." She laughed. "That's perfect for this place." After she left, Bukowski closed the door and looked down at Nobody. Don't get any ideas. We're not becoming the friendly neighbors who borrow sugar and shit. Nobody meowed like it wasn't making any promises. But it kept happening. Not dramatically, not in any way that would make a good story for anyone who preferred their redemption arcs obvious and satisfying. Just small things. Bukowski started nodding to people in the hallway instead of ignoring them. He'd hold the door for the old woman on the 3rd floor who moved slow and carried her groceries in installments. He'd pick up mail that fell out of mailboxes and put it back. Nothing that would win him any humanitarian awards. Just the bare minimum of acknowledgement that other people existed and were struggling through the same shit he was. And it was nobody's fault, in a way. The cat had reminded him, without trying, without intention, just by existing, that paying attention to suffering wasn't weakness. The old man in 7B had died alone, but his cat had noticed, had cared enough to scratch at doors until someone responded. Most people weren't even as decent as cats. Bukowski's writing changed, too. Not radically, not in any way that would make critics reassess his work or win him new readers. But the edges softened slightly. The cynicism was still there, He wasn't that far gone, but it was tempered with something else. Not hope, exactly. More like acknowledgement. Yes, everything was shit. Yes, people were mostly terrible. Yes, the world was designed to grind you down until there was nothing left. But sometimes a cat survived. Sometimes someone fed someone else's kids. Sometimes you got 3 in the morning and decided to open the door instead of ignoring the scratching. He wrote a story about the old man in 7B. Called it The Arrangement. It was about dying alone and what that meant, or didn't mean. About the difference between loneliness and solitude. About the things we leave behind that matter only because someone decides they matter. He sent it to a small magazine he sometimes published in. They bought it for $50. He used the money to buy better cat food and decent wine for once, instead of the shit that came in jugs. Nobody seemed to appreciate the upgrade. Or maybe not. Hard to tell with cats. They accepted good things and bad things with the same indifferent expression, like they'd learned long ago that neither lasted very long. One night, about 6 months after nobody had come into his life, or he'd come into nobody's life, the ownership was unclear. Bukowski woke up at 3 in the morning to find the cat sitting on his chest, staring at him. What? Nobody meowed. Not the broken sound from that first night, but not content either. Something in between, a statement of fact maybe. I'm here, you're here, this is what we have. Yeah, Bukowski said. I know. He reached up and scratched the cat's head. Nobody leaned into it. Started that rusty purr. They stayed like that for a while. Man and cat in a cheap apartment, 3 in the morning, the city doing its thing outside the window. Nothing had changed, really. The world was still shit. People were still terrible. Death was still waiting for everyone, patient and inevitable. But right then, in that moment, with a warm cat purring on his chest and wine wearing off enough that he could feel things clearly, Bukowski understood something he'd known intellectually, but never felt. The only thing that mattered was this. Right here. This moment. This breath. This heartbeat. Not the past with all its failures and disappointments. Not the future with its guaranteed decay. Just this. The present. With all its minor comforts and small acknowledgments that life, however fucked up, was still happening. He'd spent so much time preparing for the end that he'd forgotten there was still middle to live through. You're a good cat, he told nobody. The cat's purr intensified, that broken engine finally running smooth. Eventually, nobody moved down to the foot of the bed and curled up there, and Bukowski fell back asleep. When he woke up again, it was afternoon, and nobody was sitting on the windowsill, watching the street below with those tired eyes that had seen too much but kept looking anyway. Bukowski made coffee, instant, the cheap kind, and sat at his typewriter. Nobody jumped onto the desk and assumed the usual position, guardian of the words. He rolled in a fresh sheet of paper and started typing. Not about death this time. Not about loneliness or failure or any of the usual themes. Instead, he wrote about 3 in the morning, about a cat's purr, about the way small comforts could become anchors in a world designed to sweep you away. It probably wasn't his best work. Too soft, maybe. Too close to sentimentality. His editor would probably reject it. His readers would probably think he'd gone soft, lost his edge, become one of those writers who finds a cat and suddenly thinks life has meaning. He didn't care. He kept typing. Nobody kept watching. And outside the window, Los Angeles kept being Los Angeles. Indifferent, brutal, beautiful in its way. In an apartment 4F of a building that should have been condemned, A man who'd spent his life celebrating loneliness learned that maybe sometimes having someone around wasn't the worst thing in the world. So that's it. That's the story of nobody and me, if you can call it a story. More like a series of moments that added up to something or didn't, depending on how you looked at it. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening to this from. And give me that number, 0 to 10. Did this make sense, or was it just me talking to myself again? Let me know. We're all just trying to figure out if anyone else is out there, paying attention, giving a shit. I still drink too much. I still write at night. I still think most people are full of shit and the world is designed to break you. Nothing fundamental has changed. Nobody didn't save me, didn't redeem me, didn't turn me into some cat-loving softy who sees the beauty in everything. What nobody did was scratch at the door until I answered. And sometimes, that's all it takes. Someone or something refusing to let you ignore them, refusing to let you die alone in your recliner while the TV plays and nobody notices for 3 days. The old man in 7B didn't get that chance, but his cat did. And through some accident of timing and proximity and pure dumb luck, so did I. That's not a happy ending. It's just an ending that's still in progress, which is all any of us get, really. Another day, another night, another 3 in the morning when the scratching starts and you have to decide whether to open the door or pretend you don't hear it. I opened the door. The cat came in. We're both still here. That's it. That's all there is. And somehow, improbably, ridiculously, it's enough.